What's happening, guys? William Craddock here with Will to Win Gaming. I'm back. I'm invigorated. I had something that had been going on the entire month. I am clear now. I'm ready. The last video was kind of a bust. I understand that. It just my heart wasn't into it. But now we're here. We're ready to go, and we're going to do the ever popular tier list video. You see, I've already started. Everything I have in D tier is widely decks that I'm just going to consider that have been power crept out of the format. I think anything that's going to be put on the list just does it better than something in the D tier. I realize there's a lot of pet decks. I know the Iceberg guy might be, oh shit, what is Iceberg doing there? Honestly, I've never played the deck. I've never seen anyone win at the deck, so I'm just going to assume it's power crept out. Blurple Kaido is a deck that, you know, maybe, but still, it's like, it's not better than Purple Luffy. Like, again, they just kind of do the same thing. This goes a little taller, but Purple Luffy is just a better, you know, Blurple Kaido, or better Kaido. You know, it's like Kaido with Island, right? But anyway, these are the decks I think are power crept out. And yeah, let's just move into the tier list. I think this kid is always going to be somewhere because of his leader ability, but I don't think he's actually just beats anything, and I don't think he's actually very good. So I'm just going to put him, he's probably going to be bottom of the barrel C tier. I mean, you could even say he got power crept out of the format, but I just really like Kid's leader ability. I think it's so good. But with, you know, like the Film Uta coming out in February, he's just, you know, if you want to play a deck like this, like Film Kid, just wait till February and play Film Uta. It does the same thing. You know, the event gives you essentially Kid's leader ability, and it's just a better deck. And yeah, overall, I think like if you wanted to play this deck, you could, and you could get some wins on some maybe even the higher tier decks, but it's just not very good. Let's move on to Katakuri. I think Katakuri is very well positioned right now. I think he, you know, has just a lot of strong cards. I think yellow is really strong. I think it beats a lot of what are going to be top tier decks. And I think even in unfavorable matchups, you know, just a little bit of luck and using your triggers, or even not luck, just using your leader ability well and stacking some triggers in the right time can win you a game. So I think Katakuri is an S tier deck. I do think it is the best yellow deck currently. And yeah, he's definitely belongs in the S tier. Next, we're going to move on to Purple Luffy. Purple Luffy, also very strong. I think Purple Luffy is that deck that I'm going to stick him in S tier. Purple Luffy crushes everything except for Sakazuki, right? Like, I feel Purple Luffy serves now what Katakuri was in the Whitebeard dominated format. Like, when Whitebeard was around, Katakuri crushed, you know, pretty much everything except for Whitebeard and Law, you know. And it kept a lot of decks down. Like, it really did. Like, a lot of decks were unplayable because there were people out there playing Katakuri, even Whitebeard was so dominant. And I think we're going to see that with Purple Luffy. Like, Purple Luffy is just going to smack down a lot of decks like Enel or Katakuri, even though those decks are kind of counter to the Boogeyman, in my opinion, Sakazuki, spoilers. Yeah, he's just going to serve that purpose. Like, and you know, it's not like it's an unplayable deck. I think Luffy is just better than Katakuri was last format in that same position. I think Luffy is a very strong deck, and overall, I think it's a really strong pick if you're looking for a deck for nationals. And I'm not gonna say it's like a brain dead deck, but if it's a deck you don't want to think as hard, Purple Luffy is definitely where you want to be. Red Purple Luffy. Now this deck I tried. Like, I wanted this deck to be good. I wanted this deck to crush people. And I wanted to be like Whitebeard, right? Like, I loved Whitebeard. Y'all know me. I love the Whitebeard deck. But it just can't do it because it's so behind on resources. Like, being a 3-card leader, even though you are 6K and you have that natural advantage of they're having to invest Dawn to hit your life, it's just not enough. Like, it's close. Like, this will steal games. If you can play, you know, you chain 9 gates and you're an 8K, they can't kill you, right? And then you can just finish them off with the Gear 5 Luffy, take next turn, kill them. That can happen, but for the most part, when you play this deck against the other top tier decks, especially stuff like Purple Luffy, they're just too fast. They just beat you down too quick, and you can't really get your footing because you have you start with 3 life. You have 3 less cards or 2 less cards than your opponent for the most part. Next, go to Blue Croc. I actually really like Blue Croc. I try to make it work in this new format. His biggest issue is he's just a worse version of Sakazuki, in my opinion. He kind of does the same thing. He tries to establish a board while making tempo. They play the same cards like Blue Hina. He can play the 7-drop Borsalino, and he can play Mihawk, and he can go 1-for-1 for you all day. But again, I think the problem with him is he's just too slow for the current environment. Like Luffy's going to put out, on his 4 Dawn turn, if he wins a die roll, he can put out 2 guys. He can go page 1 combo, ulti page 1, and then Croc you're behind. Like, what's Croc going to do? Unless you hit a trigger Red Rock, you're just going to die. Right? And then you have things like Katakuri, which naturally prey on something like Croc because he can go 1-for-1 all day, but then you play Big Mom and all of a sudden you're 2 cards behind. So I like Croc. I think it's a deck you can still play, but I don't think it's going to win you any events. Zoro, you guys know I'm what you might call a Zoro hater. I think Zoro is still fairly viable. I think going and playing a bunch of dudes and attacking for 5 several times works. Like, you can still do it. I think his big issue is he just doesn't really have any good matchups versus the top tier bracket. Generally, yeah, I know Zoro can beat Katakuri. I know this isn't like favor for Katakuri. I honestly would think it's more 50-50 than people give it credit for. But Luffy, I think he's going to struggle with Luffy. I know, Luffy uses leader ability. He's down life, but, you counteract that if you play a 7 kid and all of a sudden now you're Whitebeard, or you poly their play and then on turn 10 you drop like 2 6k blockers. It really ties up Zoro's Dawn investment so they can no longer do those very efficient pokes. It's just an extra Dawn. And so instead of getting those efficient pokes in, now you're swinging 6Ks and you might not be able to develop your board after swinging. So it kind of makes you take a turn off. But overall, I think Zoro's still fine. Again, it's a deck you can play. You just have to build a little differently. I know they're going pretty heavy on Janbei now. Overall, an okay aggro deck. Maybe B tier, but I'll put him in A for now. Maybe change my mind. Because I am a Zoro hater. Below Betty. So this deck is really interesting. It's like the high roll version of Zoro. Like, I know Zoro has high roll draws too, but Betty is like, you either high roll off the planet or you just sit in a dumpster and lose. Like, I've had so many games against Betty where I'm just like, well, I'm just not going to attack, right? And they're so slow to develop their board they don't get triggers, right? And even if they go first, you get them going first. I know some play that event that puts a guy in for free. You just don't attack them. If they just go 3 Dawn, attack for 5, you know what they have. You just don't attack them. They can't develop their board, right? And that's the problem. I felt like, I've been playing Sakazuki lately, and Betty's just like, well, eventually I'll build a board. Eventually they get some guys down. You just kill them, and they're so far behind. When it works, it works. But for the most part, I just don't think it works consistently. The biggest plus for Betty, it's a huge budget option, right? If you're trying to play the game on a budget, Below Betty is perfect, right? Like, it's a decent enough deck for what it is, but if I was going to choose to play an aggro deck, I'd probably pick Zoro or Luffy over it. Laker Croc. I love this deck. And this is that deck, like, I think if Katakuri didn't exist, Laker Croc could be up here. Like, and I think that's the problem I also had the last format. Like, it has a lot of game against a lot of stuff, but Katakuri just kind of keeps it down. Honestly, I'm going to say a really well-played Laker Croc is B tier. But I honestly think without Katakuri, it could be up here. Like, it is slow, but I think it does have game against things like Luffy. Just because it has a lot of control elements. You can Katakuri, you can play you have big guys, right? Like, you have big guys that heal, and that's pretty good against Luffy. You can generate a lot of cards. But against Katakuri, they're just chaining Big Moms. You have no answer to it. And like I said, these are like the gatekeepers of the format, and I think they do a very good job at gatekeeping this deck. At least this half does. I think it has game against Luffy, but this just you stay down there, you can't come up. Let's move to. We'll come back. I'll move him down the line. Y'all not gonna like what I say. All right, Whitebeard. Let's talk about Whitebeard. So, Whitebeard to me is the king of A tier. I think Whitebeard is still very strong. There's a lot of debate among people I talk to, and I go on Facebook and I visit forums versus the Rush Beard versus the Pure Beard. They're the traditional beard. You're playing ISO and 4-blocker Marcos, and to me personally, I think Rush Beard is where you want to be. Meaning you're playing like the 4 Rush Luffys, you have the Namis, you have the Sanji, the new Sanji out of the 3 Captains deck. And the reason being, I think, at least for now, blocker Marco is not where you want to be. It's also, you can also see it kind of reflected in the format because we don't have a lot of the 1-drop blockers anymore. They're not getting played right now for the same reason. Like Houndblaze is big, right? Like Houndblaze is a card. And, in the last format, you saw every deck, or almost every deck, had choppers. They had your Capone, Veggies. They had, the 1-drop blockers. Like, they were so good. But now there's so many ways to remove it, like Rob Lucci and Houndblaze. Like, I just think that makes even something like Blocker Marco worse. Like, it's just not a real big blocker format, and the people that are playing blockers, they're, they do a lot. Like your Queens, and they've got your Rebecca's and your Borsalinos, which are hard to KO. So overall, if I had to pick one, I would say Rushbeard. I think Rushbeard has just a much better matchup in the top tiers. I think it's good in Katakuri. I think Rushbeard's good in Sokka. I think you're really going to struggle with Purple Luffy. I think Purple Luffy is the gatekeeper to Whitebeard. I think without, if he wasn't up here, Whitebeard could be up here. But I think this gatekeeps Whitebeard pretty well. Let's go on to another deck that I played a lot of. Take a drink real quick. Excuse me. Rebecca. I love the Rebecca deck, and I think it goes straight to A tier. I think Rebecca is super strong into everything except for... Okay, I'm not going to say super strong, but I think it's strong into everything except for this guy. You keep Rebecca down. Like, Rebecca has pretty good matchup into Luffy. If you're playing a certain build of Rebecca. Don't get me wrong. I think traditional Rebecca struggles a little bit into Luffy. But there's certain builds of Rebecca right now. Really good into Luffy. It's really good into Sokka. Like, it smushes the Sokka deck. Because you're kind of trying to do the same thing, except the Rebecca's like the control version, right? You're drawing more cards. Sokka's more tempo oriented, Rebecca's control, and Rebecca just smushes Sokka. But you have a really bad Katakuri matchup, and that's why I'm a sticker in A tier. I do believe Rebecca deck actually went 9-0 at an event recently in the Swiss portion. But still a really good deck. Red Purple Law. We'll come back to you. Let's put Sokka where he belongs real quick. All right, let's talk about Sokka. Sakazuki, to me, is the best deck. The problem with Sokka is just going to be skill ceiling. Like, the deck is incredibly difficult to play. And that's not to say you can't just pick up and derp with Sokka, because you can. Like, anyone can pick up Sokka and go, like, Herp Derp, Ice Age, Meter Fist, Rob Lucci. Right? Like, that's easy. That's the easy part of the deck. The hard part is making the correct decisions every turn in the games that are more difficult, right? Like, Sokka has free win games, just like, it's a One Piece. And there's a lot of free win games. So that can happen. Sokka has those, but for the most part, you have to have a clear line, and it really rewards players that deck build well and plan a few turns ahead. It is definitely the most thought-intensive top-tier deck. Like, I mean, I don't think like you have to be a rocket scientist to play Sokka by any means, but you will make the most mistakes playing Sokka unless you practice it. And don't get me wrong, like, even the best players right now, I think Impact, my teammate's one of the best Sokkas. He's been practicing for months already, and I've seen a few others. I'm just like, wow, I never would have seen that line. they still make mistakes. Like I still watch them punt away games. Like I do it too. I'm you know, I'm not even like in consideration for that top slot Sakazuki player, and I can still see when they punt away games. So it's a very difficult deck. But for the most part, the best deck. Like I just don't think it has any real terrible matchups. The Katakuri is, I think, good into it, but these are still very winnable. A lot of times, it's not even like the first, 2 or 3 triggers that stop Sokka. It's the last live trigger. A lot of times, it's like, well, do they hit a Beiji off their last life, or do they hit a Maya Brule off their last life? These games are still close. Like I don't think it's a stomp. Sabo. I think Sabo is fun. I think it's playable to some degree. I just think the color combination is bad. Like red and black just don't. It's like black's got these like amazing blockers and all this good, removal, and red's got like rushers and some of these good events, which just sounds like they should go together. But Sabo as a whole just doesn't work very well. On top of which, having to invest 1 Dawn for his leader ability is just rough. Like it is just. You're basically playing off curve on turns you want to protect your board, which against decks like Sokka, it's going to be a lot, right? So overall, just a fun deck. You can do cool things, but just not a great deck in my opinion. Red Purple Law. This is like an aggro killer, and I really don't enjoy Red Purple Law. I just think its matchups are so bad against anything above it. And even not great against things in its tier. I mean, it's a deck. If you've played it, you can just blow people out with tempo, right? Like you just Gordon into Sachi and Penguin. The next turn, Gordon again into Rush Zoro into a Beppo. And all of a sudden, you have 4 guys on board and they have none, but you still have most of your Dawn. Like it has insane tempo plays. But there's so much to counter it now. Like Rob Lucci, Luffy can play like the 7-drop kid, become a Whitebeard, which makes it really hard to poke. Katakuri can hit triggers, and then it just kind of undoes the game plan of, I'm get a bunch of guys out and swarm you. Like you hit a Cracker trigger or, a Parasparrow, like you just have extra guys to take out their board, and it just really dampens the game plan. I know a lot of people are excited for this deck. I just don't think it's where you want to be. Next, let's move to Blue Nami. It has some play against some of the top tiers. Like, I don't think Nami's unplayable, and I think the really good thing about One Piece is, like, even decks down here you'll get wins against these decks. I just think, like, Nami doesn't have any real amazing matchups, anything up here. I'm sure it beats Sokka. I'm sure you can, I think it's going to struggle against the other two. I'm sure it can beat Sokka. I think it's going to beat Rebecca. It's going to struggle with the other two in A tier. It's going to struggle with Betty. This is interesting. I wonder if it struggles with Luffy. I think it would, because they can just get down big things too quickly. And they have like this amazing kill turn with Manga with Gear 5. I think it would struggle here too. So I think Nami, while it's still playable, just has a lot of trouble with things in these upper tiers. And just that's going to keep it out of the format. Enel. Okay, so maybe the only hot take I have in this tier list. I don't particularly like Enel. I know it won the first regional. Don't get me wrong. I understand this, guys. I was there. But I think Enel is the upfront skill check leader. I just don't think I think it hovers between A and B, honestly. Like, I think if we're putting this in like order, I think Enel's last the A tiers. And, I'm not trying to be just controversial with it. I just think that he is mostly a skill check. Like, I know Enel can have some really great draws. It can play different game. It's very flexible, right? Like, you can play a starve game. You can swarm with Ohm and Holy if you're playing that variant. You can, rush Enel into Yamato. There's a lot it can do. It can also play the late game, if you can control their board and you can keep healing. The problem is, I think the better we get as a community, the worse Enel gets. I don't think it's an unplayable deck by any means. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying just throw your Enels in the garbage. But I think it's a little overrated. would be all I would say. I think Enel is just a little overrated, and as we improve as a community, it's just going to go. Its stocks are going to go down a little bit. But that's not to say it can't win. Like I said, anything in these tiers and up, easily win a tournament. Like I have no problems with this. So you want to play Enel, go for it. Just like I said, I'm not passionate about it. I'd rather play Katakuri if I was playing a yellow deck. Finally, I'm going to put Red Green Law. Now, I don't think this is a hot take. I think Red Green Law shoots straight to S tier. I think Red Green Law just has good matchups against a lot of these things down here. And even these first two up here in S tier. I think his biggest glaring problem is Sakazuki. I haven't seen a ton of people play this, but I have seen it played at a high level. And Sokka just, for the most part, obliterates Law. Like Rob Lucci is so good against it. And I know Law are teching stuff like Dogura to try to get their shambles out earlier, but you know, you can just break that with the Ice Age Rob Lucci and you just kill their Law and kill something else. And it's just that, between that and Hound Blazes, like there's just so much removal coming out of the Sokka deck. And you can just 2-for-1 them all day, right? Like it's just, that's what Rob Lucci does, right? It just 2-for-1s you. And it's just, it's not unwinnable, but I think it's a bad matchup. But that being said, I think Law can actually beat, you know, it beats Katakuri, it can beat Luffy, it can beat Whitebeard, Zoro, and now like it can beat all these decks. It just has problems with Sokka, and Sokka is going to be a big part of the meta, so I think that's a real issue. But this is probably how I'd put my tier list. I might swap 1 or 2 leaders or around the A and B bracket, but for the most part, this is how I'd put it. I think, like I said, the best thing about One Piece is a lot of these decks are playable, even the ones I have in D tier. Like they are playable. It's just not what you'd want to win a tournament, right? Like it's just not, you know, I wouldn't want to play Iceberg, you know, at a tournament. But that's not to say it can't win, especially if you're a specialist in your deck. Like I've played a lot with a guy who's an ace specialist, and he's just, I've ran over aces constantly throughout the last few months in tournaments, but he actually gives me a run for my money because he knows how to play his deck. So if you play something down here and you really like it, just don't give up on it. You play something up here and you really like it, you know, take it to a tournament, you have a good chance of winning as long as you're a proficient pilot. Besides that, I'm talking about 2 more things. One is thank you to Kayfabe Cards. That's our sponsor. They help me travel, help me get equipment along with our patrons. You know, y'all really the ones that let me do things like this and, you know, help me get anything like cards. And I just bought a new monitor. I'm, you know, about to set up my Twitch stream room. So I got a new monitor, I got a new table. I'm getting, you know, nicer things. I'm not getting stuff that's going to break, right? So I don't have to buy it again. I'm about to put in an order for a new PC. It's going to take a few weeks to get here, but I'm excited about that. And finally, if you have time, I don't know if I'm going to have a Discord link for this, but there is a new Discord server that is hosting ranked sim battles. Essentially, you know, it's just a bot with an MMR, ELO system, or whatever you want to call it. But the good thing is it's a server, and a lot of the players are of a higher quality. You know, you're going in to play a tournament match, right? You're not playing against a random person on the sim, which, you know, a lot of those people are just maybe trying out decks that they only have cards for in person, or maybe they're new, you know. So you may not be getting the highest quality match for what you want. But now there's a server, you can play ranked. And a lot of the matches are against people who are just wanting to, you know, practice for tournaments. So if I can get you a link for that, check it out. If not this video, I'll definitely have a link for it next video. And yeah, that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any, you know, if you want to talk about any of the tier choices, put them in the comments. I know this could start a flame war, so let's keep it civil on the tier list stuff, right? Like, because people are passionate about their leaders, their decks. So, but yeah, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see everyone next time. Peace.